the advent of AI technologies being commoditized. It's way easier today than 5 or 10 years ago to build a product, especially at the MVP level. It's way easier to write code. And that means that to build a moat, we believe that user experience, building something that people actually want to use, making a product delightful will be the real differentiation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of my interview series with the VC funds from the UK and Europe. My name is Vinay. I lead investor partnerships for EMEA at Tracxn. Through this series, I host VCs, investors across Europe to explore how venture capital is evolving, where the next generation of transformative companies will come from. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Benjamin Torrero, investor at Boost Capital Partners, an early-stage venture capital firm backing founders, building human-centered technology across sectors such as fintech, health tech, SaaS, media, and prop tech. Boost focuses on pre-seed and seed-stage companies and partners closely with founders to help them scale products that improve how people interact with technology. Benjamin brings particularly interesting perspective coming from a background in law and investing, and is also known for exploring behavioral approaches to venture capital and founder decision-making. Benjamin, welcome, and great to have you with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Now, let's talk about Boost's philosophy, UX as a venture thesis. Boost places a strong emphasis on user experience and human-centered technology. Why do you believe UX can be a strong signal for long-term success than purely technical innovation?
What we're seeing now is, especially with the advent of AI technologies being commoditized, it's way easier today than 5 or 10 years ago to build a product, especially at the MVP level. It's way easier to write code. And that means that to build a moat, we believe that user experience, building something that people actually want to use, making a product delightful will be the real differentiation, because the baseline is becoming more and more technology driven, I would say. It's just easier to build technology. So the only mode that you can build is that people actually want to use your product. So we focus a lot on people that understand how important it is to think about their users, to think about what people actually want to use, even on B2B, to think about what the employees of a company want to use and how to make it easier for them, and how to build a good onboarding process, et cetera, because we think that when technology is commoditized, that's the only way in which you can differentiate yourself.
Right, that's interesting, especially the idea that adoption and behavior ultimately determine whether technology succeeds. It shifts the lens from what a product does to how it's actually experienced, right? So moving on to the next question. Like many early stage investors talk about market size and defensibility. You often talk about how humans interact with technology. How does that lens change the way you evaluate companies?
It's very interesting. We see it in a couple of different ways. We think technology enables human-to-human interaction, and we think that human-to-technology interaction is also very important. And we see it from how does technology help someone improve at their job and be more efficient, or have better results, to how does technology enables someone to exercise more or to improve their life in some way. And even we think about how technology is not always beneficial for humans, and how we can, or the companies that we invest in can help humans develop a better relationship with technology. We've invested in companies that help break digital addiction, for example. So we believe that technology is now and will be even more intertwined in human life, and we like understanding how that interaction will look like in the future, and how we can invest in companies that also understand that, and that make bets for the future of human to technology interaction.
Great. Now, when you say backing founders that move UX forward, what does that actually look like in practice when you are still sitting in an investment meeting?
So every time we make an investment, and if you looked at one of our investment memos, we have a section that is how important is user experience in this product. Our thesis is to invest in software companies where uh, you can improve the user experience by the product that you're building. That means that we will never invest in, I don't know, biotech, also because we don't understand it, or in hardware. Um, and then we are left with software products where if there is a human at the end of that product, you probably want to make a good experience for that human. So we evaluate how important that is. Sometimes you're building software that's where you barely have humans interacting with it, and that's okay. We probably won't invest in that because we don't believe that we can add value in those type of companies. Because of our previous expertise, uh, we think that the difference between Boost and other funds is that we can actually help in building that user experience. So if there is human beings at the end of that software product that will benefit from having a better user experience, we'll probably prioritize those investments over companies that don't have that factor. So we definitely consider it in our investment committees.
Right. You describe yourself as a behavioral VC, right? What does behavioral thinking bring to venture capital that traditional frameworks may miss generally?
So we one thing that I would say most of us have in common in the team is that we're all big proponents of using behavioral science and behavioral economics in both building products and investing. And we actually have behavioral scientists as an advisor, and that has helped our companies a lot in thinking about their products, and thinking about onboarding and their experience, etc., etc. So there's two ways in which we see this. One is actually building the product. How do you create nudges? How do you think about the experience? How do you think about people's behavior when using that product? And we help with that, and we bring, for example, this advisor or other advisors that are experts in that field. And the other one is on investing itself. Um, from, well, are these people thinking about their users in the right way and building an experience that is uh, you know the best towards what they want to achieve or they want their users to do, and also trying to understand them as people. We're very people centric in our way that in the way that we invest. I would say people are probably 80% in the weight of our decision making, if not higher, also because we are very, very early stage. So we try to understand the founders as much as we can. If you look at one of my first calls with a founder, I probably will speak about the company 5% of that time, and the rest will be about the founders, trying to understand them. We've dedicated a lot of time trying to understand the factors that will make someone more likely to build a big company, and then designing questions that will get us closer to the answers of, is this person do they have those factors, or are they likely to build that big company? So we try to understand founders as much as possible as well.
Right. So generally, these first meetings happen outside of the the general ecosystem, or like say if you schedule a meeting with one of the founders, right? So your focus is mostly into what he is actually rather than what he's building, right? That's your initial focus.
Yeah, exactly. It's much more about understanding them as people and as a team,
Right.
rather than talking a lot about what they're building. We will after that first call and when we do our due diligence, but initially we want to understand the people.
Right. Do you also consider their background, like say if they are an alumni from the top institutions, or if they are a serial entrepreneur? Would these things really matter to you?
Yes. Also because there's very little data on on an early stage company, right? So the most data that you have is actually on people, and that is from the school that we went, which I would say is not very heavy in our weighting of factors, but things that are important. For example, for us is how many languages do they speak, or did they move in their lives, or are they living in the same country that they grew up? What signs of excellence do they have? Like maybe they are pro athletes, or they excelled in their previous job, or whether they worked at a startup before, or they're second time founders, or repeated entrepreneurs. So all those things, we definitely look into them, and we've automated a lot of that analysis because a lot of that is public, right? Like you get that LinkedIn profile. So we have agents that look at those like factors and create a scoring, and then create a record in our table of the people that score above a certain threshold based
Right.
on those factors.
There is growing discussion around AI in venture. You recently mentioned using AI agents that analyze deals, risks, and competitive landscapes. How is that changing how your team evaluates opportunities?
Completely. We now like a lot of our sourcing, I would say the majority of our sourcing is automated, from scraping, then as I said, like scoring with agents, creating the record in our CRM, etc., etc. Most of our deals now come through that method, and we get to look at many more companies a year than we did when we didn't do that. So it makes us faster, more efficient, and we're able to look at much more than we did when we didn't have that.
Interesting. Now let's talk about early stage investing in 2026. Boost invests very early, typically at pre-seed and seed. What signals do you look for when there is still very little data available?
We come back to the people. So a lot
Okay.
of our investments, they don't have revenue. Some of them we've invested pre-product as well. I would say today it would be hard for us to invest pre-product or pre-MVP at least, unless it's a more of a deep tech company, because of what I mentioned in the beginning of it's so easy now to at least have an MVP. So why wouldn't you? So some signals that we look for: speed of execution. I would say that's very important for us. One of the questions that I always ask is, tell me what you've achieved in the past month. And the answer to that question tells you a lot about how they think, how quickly they execute, just how fast they're moving. So that's one. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're expecting traction in the traditional sense of revenue, but maybe we do expect them to, if it's a B2B, to have spoken to customers or potential customers, and understand the pain, and willingness to pay, etc. So I would say signs of traction in terms of execution,
Right.
speed, and then coming back to the people factors.
Excellent. Very, very interesting methodology that you have. Like, you rely completely on people. That's a great thing. Now, when it comes to the early stage investing again, like many early stage startups today build impressive technology but struggle with adoption. Why do you think distribution and user management remain such a difficult problem?
I think when it's easier to build products as it is today,
Mhm.
much more competition, and the buyers of those products are getting flooded. And we've seen this with some of our companies where we talk to their customers and they said, yeah, I get emails, like 50 emails a day of people selling me similar products. So it's very hard to stand out especially when you don't get those customers through network, and you're trying to approach them cold. So distribution is important because technology is becoming easier. And it's the same as with user experience, right? Who's going to have an advantage? The people that can get their product faster into their customers' hands, instead than the people, or rather than the people that can build the product faster, because now everyone can build products fast. So it's about putting that in people's hands, rather than building the product. And this is unless you're building in deep tech or some more complex technologies, right? But the majority of the companies have this problem.
Right. I think that challenge around distribution seems to be a recurring theme across many early stage companies today. Now, moving on to the next question, like what patterns are you seeing in the next generation of founders that feel different from 5 years ago?
Speed, definitely speed. We're seeing people executing incredibly fast. They are relentless. I talk about, like, a lot of the times, and we're not scared about investing pre-revenue, but a lot of them actually have revenue in the first 1 or 2 months of after starting the company, and they build very quickly and they sell very quickly. Um, the hunger that they have is impressive, and the speed at which they execute, I would say, is faster than ever before. So that is definitely one. We've always had young founders, but I would say the volume of young founders is higher today than it was in the past. Um, Many more people that prefer not to go to university and they start building, or they got hired very young at a startup and now they're building their own. So we are definitely seeing more and more of that. And I think networks are becoming interesting as well because of just the access that you can have to people all over the world. So networks in the sense of talent acquisition and what founders can uh, take from the pools of talent, networks around their ability to raise capital, and their investor networks, and that works around customers. So we're seeing more and more founders that are sophisticated in the way that they build their networks, and very intentional around that as well.
Right. It definitely feels like the profile of founders is evolving alongside the tools and the markets they're building for. Now, let's talk about the ecosystem itself, like Europe, LATAM, and global startups. Like Boost invests across Europe, Latin America, and the US. What differences do you see in how founders build companies across these ecosystems? Do you see a difference?
Yeah, 100%. If I talk about LATAM, for example, you have a lot of founders that are building companies for immediate problems. When in Europe, you can find companies, and in the US for sure, companies that's built for problems 10 years in the future, or that are somehow building the future. In LATAM, you have a lot of companies that are solving inefficiencies in the present. So that's a very big difference. And that's why, for example, LATAM is so big on fintech, and you will probably not find a lot of deep tech in LATAM. And now it's shifting towards health as well. because those are the immediate problems and the inefficiencies, and there's money to be made there. But that also means that if you only invest in LATAM, you won't be able to see those 10 or 20 years into the future of companies building that. Another difference is the size of the markets. I would say the US, obviously, we all know that it's a massive market, a lot of willingness to pay, much more willing to try new technologies. So different than Europe. And even LATAM, in a way, is an easier market in the sense of you build something in France. If you want to go to Germany or to the UK, you have to adapt in terms of language, culture, sometimes even regulations. If you build something in San Francisco, you can go to New York and you can go to Austin, etc., etc. If you build something in Colombia, you can go to Argentina and you can go to Mexico because they speak the same language and the regulations are very similar and the culture is even similar. So I think there's a challenge in Europe around moving in between markets, and we've seen this with some of our companies as well. In like, how do we think about going from one country to another? The other thing I would say between that is different between LATAM and both the US and Europe is in LATAM, the 0 to 1 is much harder. In Europe and in the US, the 0 to 1 is way easier. From raising capital, in Europe, you have a lot of public funding and grants that are very helpful. In the US, you just have a lot of capital that you can tap into. In LATAM, that is harder, and getting customers is also harder. That makes for very resilient founders and very capital efficient founders. But it also sometimes, I would say, puts a ceiling on the ambition because it's so hard to go from 0 to 1 then that you take longer and it drains you a bit more. So going from 1 to 10 and to 10 to 100 then becomes you're already tired and you've already consumed some capital and you've already consumed time. So it is an interesting difference.
Great. Very good perspective, Benjamin. Now, are there any lessons that European founders could learn from startups across, say, Europe? I mean, say within Europe, again, Europe is a very fragmented market, right? I mean, so European founders learning from Latin American founders or vice versa.
Yeah, I think resilience is one. Not that European founders are not resilient, of course they are. But when going back to that, like 0 to 1, when it's harder to build that, you definitely have a thicker skin and you become very resilient. If it's very easy to build the 0 to 1, you can become slightly more fragile. So I think learning that would be definitely great. And then I would say from the US, we all can learn a lot as well. Not saying that the US is a perfect ecosystem, they have their problems. But I think in the US, the levels of ambition, especially if you go to places like San Francisco, even to in New York to a certain extent, the levels of ambition are incredibly high. And sometimes it's even like funny to see how everyone thinks that they're going to change the world, even if they're not. But I think that's sort of naivety around building something great is something that more founders in Europe could take from.
Right. I think that the cross ecosystem learning could become even more important as startups think globally from day one, right?
Yeah.
Great. Now, from your vantage point, where do you think the next major 5 European startup hubs will emerge outside of the usual cities?
So that is a good question. I think there's some space probably in. I've always liked Tallinn. I think there's very good technical talent. It's a small city, so that's a problem. I think we'll see probably more companies starting there and building and then moving in Europe. I think there's definitely much more to do in Eastern Europe in general. Places like Poland and Romania and Hungary. I think since Western Europe is becoming so competitive, more and more people will probably start looking around there. And they're bigger, like they're big markets as well. And there's very good talent, and it's right now it's still cheaper, so you can be more capital efficient in terms of attracting talent. So I think we will probably see in the next few years more and more people building there, especially with like how easy it is to build remotely, and like with AI and et cetera, to build in one place and then deploy in other places. So I think we'll probably start seeing that's like Eastern Europe growing more and more. Um, Probably more in Germany, but that's already an important like country for VC. Um, the Nordics are everyone knows that they're growing a lot. Probably Denmark is a little bit behind, or Copenhagen is a little bit behind um, versus Stockholm. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Copenhagen trying to catch up to Stockholm as well.
Right. So is the Nordics market is slightly different from the rest of the Northern Europe?
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know the reason for this, but for example, you go to Stockholm. I love Stockholm because it's the place, even more than London, I would say, that I've felt the closest to being in San Francisco without being in San Francisco. And the reason
Oh,
is there's always someone like doing something there. There's always something happening there. You go there with no plan and nothing in your calendar, and you reach out to a couple of people, and suddenly your whole week is full. And that's something that only happens in San Francisco or New York.
good.
So they are moving incredibly fast. And I think that trends will probably continue.
Oh, interesting to know about Stockholm. I mean, I've been interacting with a lot of people from the Nordics region, particularly. I think Denmark, as you said, will try to catch up. But I can see that effort. Copenhagen is catching up with Stockholm already. I think there are a lot of funds emerging, a lot of investment activity taking place there. Great. Now, the ecosystem perspective, we've just spoken. Now, let's talk about the portfolio and product thinking. Right? Boost always talks about rolling up the sleeves and working closely with founders. What does hands-on support actually look like once you invest?
It depends a lot on the specific company, but I'll give you a couple of examples. Yesterday, I spent a good amount of time in one of our portfolio companies' office, talking to their main like product person because they're about to release an app, and going about like their onboarding process, suggesting some ideas around where to put their paywall, etc. I do that probably almost every week where I work from a different portfolio company's office. Um, so we are very close to them. Some of them obviously are not in London, so it's a bit harder.
Right.
We have companies that asked us after we invested that instead of a board meeting, let's have a call every 2 weeks where they would like basically talk through all the problems that they were going through, and we would suggest solutions, make introductions, etc., etc. So we also stay close with companies that are not based in the UK. We have companies where one of our founders in the UK, we meet up over weekends and we go for lunch and go for a walk, and we talk about both the business and everything else for 2 hours. So it looks very different between each company, but what we try to do is be available always for whatever the founders need. If they need that, like a walk and a catch up on a Sunday, that's what we'll do. If they need support with their product team, that's what we'll do. So even though we let them drive that relationship, we're always going to be available.
Oh, great. Great to know the hands-on support that you provide. Now, looking across your portfolio, what characteristics tend to appear repeatedly among the strongest founders you've backed?
I think going back to speed, that is one. The strongest founders move the quickest. I think understanding of their customer is very important. The ones that are uh, doing or performing the best are the ones that have a deep understanding on the person who will ultimately pay for whatever product they're building or use whatever product they're building, and they tailor the product for that. And I would say network as well. Either ability to raise capital very easily and very quickly, or a deep network of potential customers that they can sell to, or anything that gives them that slight advantage.
Right. Now, do you also help your portfolios to raise their next rounds or the bigger rounds, since you're entering in a very early stage?
Yes, and part of what we do is try to develop relationships with funds that may want to invest in companies from our portfolio in future rounds. So we help them with that. We make introductions, and sometimes we help them even like deeper on building the round. With this company, for example, yesterday we were talking about how we're going to make the storytelling and the deck, and we're basically going to raise the round together. And I told them I'll uh, try to prepare the funds as much as possible and take calls with them, etc. So we try to be very active with that part as well.
Great. Thank you. Now, let's touch upon the founder advice and the future of venture. If a founder approached you tomorrow with a new startup idea, what is the first question you would ask them that most investors don't ask?
I would say one of them is the one that I mentioned. Tell me what you've achieved in the past 30 days. Um, I don't think a lot of people ask that. And the other one is, what would make you stop building that company? I want to understand if they thought about their own sort of reasons to quit. If maybe they'll say that nothing, maybe they will actually think more about it and they'll say, I don't know, health or my family or whatever. But it's good to understand their own thinking about when they will stop, if they stop.
Correct. Looking ahead 10 years, what do you think will change most about venture capital firms identify and back companies?
I think smaller funds will be much more efficient. I think hiring will be lower, especially at junior levels, and especially with smaller firms. Technology will be much more embedded in how we do venture capital. AI, definitely. And probably most GPs will focus on the human elements and the decision-making elements rather than the writing a memo and the actual finding of a company, and all those things that are still, for many people, are manual but don't add that much value. So I think human judgment will be even more important in the future than it is now.
Great. Benjamin, this has been a really thoughtful discussion. I think what stands out is how your approach challenges some of the traditional ways of looking at early stage investing, especially by putting user behavior and human experience at the center of decision making. It is also fascinating to hear how behavioral thinking and new tools like AI are beginning to reshape how venture capital itself operates. Thank you again for sharing your perspective and taking the time to join us today. And to everyone watching, thank you for tuning in. We will be back with more conversations with leading investors across Europe and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.